Today I've come to an England divided with two polarised rival factions. It's not the England of Brexit, but it's the England of the Wars of the Roses. Our story starts at the end of a period of intense conflict between England and France. The 100 Years' War had left England battered, its economy devastated after funding army after army to go across and fight with its neighbour across the Channel. This economic issue was coupled with the problem in England of a weak king. Henry VI was mentally ill and increasingly unable to govern his kingdom. In addition, he was seemingly unable to provide a male heir to the throne with his wife, Margaret of Anjou. There was uncertainty about the present, and there was uncertainty about the future. The nobles of the kingdom summoned a great council, where Richard, the Duke of York, one of the most powerful barons in the land, declared himself the Lord Protector of England. The scene was now set for a kingdom that was beginning to come apart along the lines of two families. On the one side were the Yorkists, led by Richard, Duke of York, taking as their emblem the white rose, and on the other side was the House of Lancaster, the red rose showing the royal dynasty of King Henry VI. As the Lord Protector, Richard, Duke of York, began to usurp the powers of the mentally ill Henry VI. Of course, this did not go down very well at all with the king, and what happened next was a series of brutal and bloody civil wars that resembled very closely a real Game of Thrones. Ah, there you are. Fighting kicked off in the War of the Roses in 1455 with the First Battle of St Albans, where Henry tried but failed to dislodge Richard of York from his power base. However, another campaign 4 years later, inspired by Henry's wife, Margaret of Anjou, led to Richard's eventual defeat and escape from England, taking his Yorkist faction with him. Richard's first son, Edward, soon stepped into the breach, winning a decisive victory against the Lancastrians at the Battle of Towton in 1461. For the first time, a Yorkist king was now on the throne of England unopposed. However, he was not to stay unopposed for very long. In 1469, one of the most powerful noblemen in the country, the Earl of Warwick, withdrew his support for King Edward and instead switched sides to the Lancastrians, resulting in a restart of what had been a brutal, bloody civil war in England. The Earl of Warwick sailed to France, where he was to find Margaret of Anjou. There he was to seek an alliance which was to restore Henry VI, the Lancastrian, to the throne of England. After all, this Earl wasn't known as the Kingmaker for nothing.
Pine nuts, so some pine nuts in there as well.
I've just met Kevin here in the shadow of Arundel Castle, who's going to be able to tell us a bit about the weaponry and armour used at the time of the War of the Roses.
Yes, I mean obviously the English armours of the period most of the time weren't even made in England. The armour industry in England was really suffering from, in fact, steel import taxes at the time.
Quite similar to today.
Nothing changes. The armour itself in that period was made from hardened and tempered spring steel. It wasn't the iron of earlier years. As early as the 14th century, we start seeing the introduction of steel armours. So the earlier iron armours, they were just too soft. too vulnerable to distortion, to breakage. So if you were wealthy enough, you could afford the best of armours. Now, the Earl of Warwick, of course, his effigy and the statues in Warwick all have him in Italian armour.
So this is the man who kind of kick-started the second part of the Wars of the Roses.
This is the main man, you know, they call him the Kingmaker. So his armour on his effigy is purely Italian, which means that he must have sent close-fitting garments to Italy to have his armour made.
So he's got some serious money then, really.
Some serious money. And then, of course, an armourer would have travelled from Italy with his armour to do the final fittings. It's a massive, massive show of work. Now, the armour itself is extremely practical for the way the English fought. Now, the Italians and the Germans, their armours are very, very well adapted for mounted combats. The English armour is better adapted to foot fighting. So the English were well renowned for turning up to a battle, getting off and fighting on foot, and the armour reflects that. So the folds, the articulated lames that cover the bendy parts of your stomach, came down below the groin, so you were well protected in the flexible parts of the armour.
So even the English noblemen would get off their horse and fight on foot?
Yes, very much so. I mean, you'd still get the occasional cavalry charge, as we find out in the Wars of the Roses, not always successful. But the main combat happened on foot.
Today, you are seeing kind of armour that is representational from actually the period of the Wars of the Roses. So this is all mid to late 15th century. Okay, so we will start with this. This garment is a coat of plates. It's called a brigandine.
Right.
Would you like to try it
I would
on?
love to try it on. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Here we go, brigandine. Oh, it's heavy.
Yeah. So it's actually made from a series of plates of steel, which are articulated, so it allows your body to move more when you're wearing it.
Very much. I'm going to take my glasses off for this one.
Okay.
Thank you, thank you.
So this
Brilliant,
is
wow.
so this is a hand and a half. Actually, when you fought with the sword, you used the whole of the sword. So you didn't just use like the end and the sides and the point. You'd also use it close up. Use the pommel for pushing, punching, and these parts here, jabbing people as well. So the whole, you used the whole sword as a weapon.
Right.
When you were using it.
So it's going to bludgeon, it's going to stab and all kinds of
Yeah.
things. Excellent, wow, fantastic. Have you got something bigger than that, for the size of this? Still... Wow, fantastic. Right, what's this? Yeah.
Basically, you can hold it like a sword.
Yep.
You can hold it like a spear. And again, this is very much this is for finding openings in armour. So going for the armpits, going for the centre line effectively, finding gaps. You can hold like a quarterstaff. You've got a hammer at one end, spike at this end, and then a spike at the other.
So it's very versatile. And this is, if this got in between one of these plates, that would be the end of me, basically.
Yeah, basically, if I could lift it up into a plate, or if I could find the centre line,
Right.
There are guards
then
who use
yes,
one hand.
it would be sharpened to a fairly good point.
So how tiring is a weapon like that to wield in battle?
A few minutes at a time.
A few minutes. Wow.
While things were undoubtedly tiring for the soldiers on the battlefield during the Wars of the Roses, things were no less tiring for the king. Edward IV returned to the campaign field following the departure of the Earl of Warwick from his side. He won 2 decisive victories in 1471, killing the Earl of Warwick at the Battle of Barnet and seeing off the Lancastrian heir, Edward, at the Battle of Tewkesbury.
Edward spent the next 10 years resuming another war with France, and he even managed to make an attempt on the throne of Scotland, although this didn't succeed in the end. However, in 1483 he was overcome by a fatal illness, and in a codicil before he died he named his brother and loyal friend Richard, Duke of Gloucester, to be the ward of his 2 sons, the eldest of which, when he came of age, would be the next King of England. Richard's wardship over Edward's sons soon sparked a controversial debate when both princes disappeared after being held in the Tower of London. Richard may have had them murdered because he was the next person who was to install himself as king, becoming King Richard III of England, whose story is for another time.